Welcome back. Tonight on The Advocate, we're joined here with Greg Hasty, an avid young Republican, and we'll be discussing the Boston bombers as well as U.S. constitutional rights. On April 15th, 2013, there was tragedy that hit the city of Boston. A bomb was placed at the end of the Boston Marathon where 3 people were killed and over 100 were injured. As you well know, one of the bombers was killed while the other is being currently held in federal custody. People's views on this differ quite drastically. Tell the people a little bit about your views on this.
Well, under the NDAA, we can treat the United States as a battleground. And as such, we have the right to treat anybody who commits a terrorist act basically as an enemy combatant. Under that bill, we really have the right to try that Boston bomber in our military courts and not leave it in the hands of the civilian courts.
Now, when we talk about the NDAA, we're talking about the National Defense Authorization Act, correct?
Correct, yes.
And under this act, as you were saying, we do treat the United States as a battleground, and you're stating that you're going to have him be an enemy combatant?
Right. So, as South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham has put, the suspect, based upon his actions, clearly is a good candidate for to be considered as an enemy combatant underneath this bill. We don't want the suspect essentially to remain silent, as the Miranda rights would allow. If Tsarnaev is considered an enemy combatant, then our interrogators can extract information quickly without presence of lawyers, and essentially we need to find out if they have any information about future attacks.
You did bring up the Miranda rights clause. As we all well know, if we noticed and watched the news, the second terrorist suspect was not read his Miranda rights when he was brought into custody, correct?
Correct. The accused perpetrators of these acts are not common criminals attempting just to profit from a criminal enterprise. But these are terrorists trying to injure, kill, maim innocent Americans. And that's what separates them from regular criminals that would be allowed the Miranda rights.
The reason I bring this up, as most of the United States knows, Mr. Tsarnaev was actually a U.S. citizen as of September 11, 2012. Under these rights, he should and in hopes will be treated as a U.S. citizen and given the same civil rights. Now, what you're saying, as far as the NDAA, we would take those rights from him and treat him as an enemy combatant, correct?
That is correct. The reason why, again, we were doing this despite the fact that they're considered U.S. citizens, we're looking at these bombers based on their politically charged intent. And this is based on their history, the fact that they have recently been under investigation by the FBI, and the fact that we have full knowledge of their interactions outside of the country, including visiting or having trips to Russia and maybe having communications with other terrorists within the past year.
Now, are we saying that these trips to Russia weren't just based for family, but rather religious beliefs, or do we feel that they're working with cells? Or what's the case on that, Rich?
Well, that's what we're trying to find out. Essentially, they were considered cleared by the FBI as of a couple years ago, so they have been under watch for a certain amount of time during these interactions. So the purpose of this bill is to find out the information and not allow them to keep that from us.
Mr. Hasty, while all that seems ideal and seems well and good, my concern, I think the people's concern is when is too much too much? How do we keep this from going far? While this may work well for these Boston bombers, what is to stop anybody in the United States being considered an enemy combatant? What is the criteria that we must meet in order to be considered an enemy combatant?
Well, as I said before, what separates these bombings and this bomber from other incidents is the fact that there is potential for politically charged intent. And it's not that we know that information right now, but the fact is under the Miranda rights, they have a right to remain silent. They have a right not to tell us this information. And this was a incident where they wanted to cause harm. They wanted to maim and kill innocent civilians, and have had potential contact with terrorist cells and organizations. And what defines this what works with this as opposed to other criminals, or what separates this from other criminals, are those actions and are those definitions.
And under those actions, what's to separate them from someone like, say, the so-called 2012 Aurora shooting, where we had 1 killer, 12 killed, over 50 that were injured, What's to maintain the difference, and why don't we consider him an enemy combatant? As you well know, he's actually being tried currently and is being allowed to be tried under a jury of his peers.
Well, what happened in Aurora, there are a couple major differences as opposed to the Boston bombing. Whereas the Boston bombing, like I said a second ago, was caused to cause chaos and maim and hurt innocent civilians and possibly have some politically charged reasoning behind it. The Aurora shooter had a history of mental instability. The methods are really where the definition is. And whereas it was a well planned out attack, it really didn't have any definition behind it. It wasn't really there to send a message, as opposed to what we're potentially seeing here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hasty. As we can tell, now while this may seem a little bit extreme and sometimes can be seen as something where we are getting infringed on our rights, we have to understand that the United States, working as an entire government, their main goal is to take care of their citizens and to make sure that this doesn't happen again. While I personally believe that this may be a little extreme, I do believe that the government themselves has the idea in the right direction, but can need a little help as far as writing it and maybe amending that bill. But again, that's for the future. For now, we are taking the criminals off the streets. We are treating those that are terrorists as such, and those that haven't committed any crimes shouldn't be afraid, while those that have, I think we're coming for you. My name is Andrew Escobar, and this has been The Advocate.